This is a Mightiest Governor event planning video. So, when I posted a bunch of video topics on the Discord for voting, this was surprisingly towards the top. And it's something that I'd be really excited to talk about. So, in today's video, we're going to be talking about how to plan Mightiest Governor events in terms of how you can determine if they can be planned, how to distribute gold heads when a new commander comes out, how to prioritize one over another, and how to make decisions to put your kingdom in the best possible situation to succeed. But without further ado, let's get started. First, let's talk about if you can even control a Mightiest Governor event in the first place and what the rewards look like. So, first and foremost, you need to be able to be sure that you can actually control the outcome of a Mightiest Governor event before you plan it ahead of time. So, when you are planning, you need to look at what is ahead during that week of the event. Typically, the biggest issue is Friday, Saturday being a war day, because severely wounded units can in fact increase your Mightiest Governor score, which can then either cause you to limit your own ability to fight because you're trying to control the event, or for scores to get way out of hand because it's nigh impossible to control. So keep that in mind, and if you have a fight planned that you know is going to definitively happen on Friday and Saturday, you should avoid trying to control that event. Or if it's feasible that it could spill over. You could alternatively go to a fixed and then try to adjust it if there is a fight, if you're 50-50 on if one will happen. But it's a risky proposition and you're spending resources. A big reason to control these events is it does control your resource expenditure to get these sculptures. Since Mightiest Governor commanders tend to skew towards rallies and garrisons, being able to minimize the cost of those wins and those sculptures on those players makes them more apt to be able to fight for longer come KvK time. So being able to preserve that is important, and that's why a lot of kingdoms will move to control these events. Because what could be 100 million points can then be dialed back to 10 million. And that could be a lot of speed ups, a lot of resources, and a lot of unnecessary fighting that is avoided by just controlling the event. And being able to spread that wealth out over multiple events can add up very quickly. For rankings, the top spot gives you 180 gold heads. I'm going to use that as an important benchmark, and I will be referring to it here as a first place equivalent from here on out when I'm talking about other rankings. So second gets you 90, which is half of a first place equivalent, and third place gets you 60, which is a third. Past that, it drops off a little bit. Fourth is notable at 50 because it's a little bit under a third, so it's worth looking into that too long term because it does add up. But overall, the top 3 spots are the most impactful and the quickest way to get sculptures to players. So now that we've covered what a first place equivalent is and how these events can be controlled or not, let's consider how you should split up your sculptures. So the first thing you need to consider is how many events you have to split them up. So in terms of an established kingdom without a new commander, you have that one event, and then it'll be 8 weeks before you have that same one. So an Infantry Mightiest Governor will not be another Infantry Mightiest Governor for 4 more cycles. So at every other week, you're talking about nearly 2 months. So keep that in mind when you're planning. Especially with new commanders, if you have new commanders that people are vying for at the same time as they are vying for an infantry or an archer commander, if it is a cavalry new commander. So keep that in mind, because those players will have to wait 2 more months, whereas 2 weeks is the standard period for the next on a new commander release. And since you have 3 commander cycles on a new release, that gives you 3 opportunities to split up the sculptures. So keep that in mind, because you don't have to give everybody the entire amount that they need all at once, because oftentimes if they need more than 180, they're going to need it over multiple events anyway. So keep that in mind as well. The easiest way to consider how to split it up is to consider the number of rally or garrisons you have that will need this new commander if a new commander release is coming out, or how close those players are. Typically, our group tends to consider the number of available sculptures they have, how central they are in terms of rally or garrison, and then of course how long it'll be before they'll be able to max some more. So for example, a player who only has 100 sculptures and already has a commander close enough that the 180 with their 100 would complete it would probably get more consideration than somebody who has 800 sculptures and can max commander even with an unlock, because overall that gives a better average to the kingdom because you can get both those players settled in one event. But in the case that you have a new commander and that not everybody has enough to max them day one, there are a couple ways we're going to go over here in the next couple of sections, depending on if you have 2, 3, or 4 events to try to max out commanders when a new commander releases. So that'll be our next section, but consider that is a big thing. Your sculptures on hand, your gear on hand, and how ready they would be to fight day one, depending on their rankings. So first, we're going to consider the worst case scenario when you have 2 or fewer cycles to max a commander. So let's say you have a new commander release and it is KvK and you're going to have fighting. So you're going to have 1 or 2 Mightiest Governor events to max a commander, and fighting is imminent. The first thing you should do is prioritize those top rankings to people who can max commanders day one, especially if they are at that area where a first ranking will get them there. You should consider the rally and garrison leads, depending on what the commander is, as whatever their sculptures they have on hand, 690 minus that, and get them at a minimum that ranking. For example, if a player has 650 sculptures on hand and another has 540, if you give the first place to the 540 and you give a 4th place or above to that other player, both of them will have the 690 needed to max a commander, so then both of them will be ready day one. And while it is a little frustrating if you are the one that has more cold sculptures on hand, at the end of the day, when you are rally or garrison, that is the point of having them, is to benefit the kingdom. So having 2 available is better than having 1 and a player having more sculptures on hand. That being said, if it's even, you can prioritize however you please. Obviously, players who are stronger or more established can probably bear to take lower rankings more, and that tends to show in rankings in our kingdom too. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that as many, if you only have 2 Mightiest Governor events or fewer, as many can get maxed as possible. Typically, if you want to go evenly instead, because nobody's going to have them maxed day one, I recommend splitting it so that you have 2 different players finish first, 1 player finish second twice, and then 1 player finish third twice. So what that does is it gives 2 first places to 2 players, a 3rd player gets a first place equivalent, and then the 4th player gets most of a first place equivalent. This is not the cleanest way to go because there's only 2 events, but at the end of the day, that gets you 4 solid players who get 180 sculptures. Instead, if you're trying to maximize 1 player's ability, you can give 2 first places to them, 2 second places to somebody else, and 2 third places to somebody else. What that'll do is give 360 sculptures to 1 player, 180 to another, and then 120 to a 3rd player. This is only something I recommend if you can afford to have 1 player have all those sculptures, because 2 first places is a lot of sculptures to give 1 player. So in a situation where a player has a bunch of extra sculptures and may only need 180 total, you can give the 2 second places to them and then give more to somebody else who might not get to the max without it. But I only recommend that if you only have a few garrison or rally leads that may need this new commander. Next, we're on to the standard 3 cycles. So this is a situation where either you don't have combat or you have a Mightiest Governor event that falls on cycle of the same commander that's releasing. So you have a Cav Mightiest Governor event during a new Cav commander's release, so you don't have that 4th Mightiest Governor event on the end. This means you can give 180 sculptures to 3 different players by first rank, and then you have some other options. So in this one, similarly, you want to try to prioritize players who have the ability to max day one, and if you could do that with a lower ranking, that is better for the kingdom, because rallies and garrisons, naturally, the more you have, the better it's going to be. But you want to make sure that you establish as many as possible. So ultimately, adjust to do that. But in the case that you can split them out evenly, there's a couple recommendations. If you want to go for the maximum number of first place equivalents, the best strategy is for 3 different players to get the first ranking, 1 player to get 2 second places, and 1 player to get 3 third places. Additionally, if you want to get a 4th player, you can also get 2 fourth places and a second place that is not occupied by the other player getting 2 second places to squeeze in a 6th player. So that gives you 3 first places that give 180 to each of the 3 players, 1 player who's getting 180 by 2 second places, 1 player who's getting it from 3 third places, and then 1 who's getting it from 2 fourths and a second. So that is 6 different players you can give 180 sculptures to. This is probably the most easy way to stretch that out evenly amongst players, and that gives you 6 different players who can all have a first place equivalent on their rally or garrison commander, which is probably the most even way to do it if you have a large kingdom with a lot of people who need placements. Alternatively, if you only have a few people who are higher level rally or garrisons, I recommend going a first, second, third in each spot. So each player will get a first, a second, or a third when you have 3 players, and that'll give a total of 330 sculptures, which is nearly 2 first places to each of them. So how you do this is you have player A, B, and C. So the first Mightiest Governor, they'll place A, B, C in order. The next, they will place C, A, B in order, and then B, C, A in order. So in each of those cases, you have an A in the first place, the second one, the first event, second place, the second event, third place, the third. Meanwhile, the second player has a second, a third, and a first, and then the third player has a third, a first, and a second. And this gives almost half of a max commander to 3 different players. I recommend this especially for smaller kingdoms, but in larger kingdoms it's less viable because you probably have more than 3 players who are vying to be rallies or garrisons. So keep that in mind, but that is the best way to split it evenly amongst fewer players. Last but certainly not least, we have a very, very unique circumstance, and that is the last Mightiest Governor event before the new commander release is the same troop type as the commander release. This means that, for example, if it's Cav, you have infantry, archers, leadership, and then back to Cav. So this means that you have 4 possible cycles because the first cycle that is off the new commander is for that new commander's troop type. So this is a unique situation, but when you can do this, it gives you a very unique option to try to get more commanders expertised. So in this, there's actually a possible way to get 8 or more people 180 sculptures. So first we're going to talk about the most possible first place equivalents to as many commanders as possible. Of course, each of the 4 events, you'll have somebody else placing first. That gives you 4. In second place, you'll have 2 different people placing second, twice. That gives 2 more for a total of 6. In the third spot, you'll have 1 person finishing 3 times in a row in third place, giving the same amount as a first place. That gives you 7. For the 8th, you can then go with a player finishing 4th twice, 5th in a third spot, and then 3rd, and that gives you a total of 200 heads, so they get more sculptures for the fact that they have to compete in 4 events. Or you can just go for the standard 2 third places, or 2 fourth places and a third place and get 160. And then as long as they place from 7 to 10, they'll get the extra 20 to get a total of 180 in a first place equivalent. Either way, you can use the remaining 4th, 5th places to get nearly a whole nother first place equivalent for another player if they want to place in 4 consecutive. But that can get to be a little pricey, especially when you are having multiple events where you're going to a higher score. So that's something you need to keep in mind as well. Alternatively, if you have fewer players, there's a couple ways you can play this. So you can go for the double up, so 2 first places, and you can get 3 different players that by having 2 different players finish first twice and 1 player finish second 4 times. This gives 360 sculptures to 3 players, which is half of a max and then some. Or you can even split it up a little more if you want. You could do the first, second, and third and get 4 different players, a total of 330 sculptures. So that would be a first, 180, 270 with the second, and 330 with the third. And then if you wanted to even tack on a fourth place and have that rotation the same way we rotated 1, 2, and 3 in the 3 events video, you can then go and give 380 to 4 different people. So keep that in mind as well. So that would be the same thing, A, B, C, D, and then you have D, A, B, C, then C, D, A, B, and then B, C, D, A. And what that does is everybody gets a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4, which gives 380 to 4 different people. That's another alternative that you can use. And if you want to put up with the extra amount of headache that involves, because 4 different events for 4 different people to place in can get a little pricey, so keep that in mind as well. But that is probably the best way to split it up, and either way you want to approach, if you have fewer players that you want to give more sculptures to. Last but certainly not least, as we are wrapping up our discussion here, I want to cover some other stuff that didn't fit neatly into any of the other topics. The first thing is 7 through 15. So 7 through 15 give 10 or more sculptures. So those are typically given as unlock or slowly working on commander spots. These are great ways to reward players who are newer to the game, building up. It's also a great way for players to work on commanders slowly that don't need to be maxed day one. So on the off chance you have a commander who is valuable in the field, but is not being built by a rally or garrison player because it may be a rally or garrison but also field viable, those spots are the most ideal to give to players because they give a small amount of sculptures. Once you get past 7, 6 and 5 are great options too, but 4 is really where 4 and above should probably be reserved mostly for rally or garrison mains until your kingdom's established enough that they don't need those rankings because all the rally or garrison mains are established with those commanders. Some other things to consider are scoring. For us, we typically implement a 6 million maximum in terms of points. This gives players plenty of flexibility to farm barbarians, train troops, work on their bastions, whatever they need to work on without having to impact the Mightiest Governor event. And then what we employ is a cushion. You could go as small as 1 million or 500,000, but essentially the cushion is the gap between your maximum score that you allow non-placers to have and the lowest score amongst your ranked members. So if, for example, your cushion is 1 million and your maximum is 6 million like ours is, 7 million would be the lowest score of any of the placement people. And then from there, you just establish groupings. My recommendation is, since 7 through 10 and 11 through 15 are the same rewards, whether you're 11th or 15th or 7th or 10th, with the exception of some gem changeover depending on the higher end, we always recommend that you keep the brackets the same for those rankings. So anybody who's ranked 11 through 15 has the same scoring range. And what that does is it cuts down on the little incremental jumps, because you can have everybody in the same 500,000 point increment. So in this case, if we're talking about that 7 million is the lowest ranking, 7 to 7.5 would be 11 through 15. Whereas if you were doing even smaller intervals, let's say 250,000, 15 would be 7 to 7.25, then 7.25 to 7.5 or 14, and so on and so forth. The gaps become much larger, which makes it a lot more expensive on the top end and could cause several million extra points to be needed. And while that's not necessarily a deal breaker for the person getting first place, if you can save those resources, those speed ups, all that extra spending for when fighting is needed, that could be a huge time saver and a huge resource saver for your kingdom. And it helps ensure that your top end players don't run out of resources as quickly. For us, we implement a 2 million point cushion and then 500,000 point tiers. So at 6 million maximum, 8 million is the first placer, and then 11 through 15 places in that 8 to 8.5. And then 10 through 7 places from 8.5 to 9. And then 6 places 9 to 9.5, 5, 9.5 to 10, and so on and so forth. If you want to go with that as well, you can. You could also meld, I believe 6 is the same in terms of rewards, just more gems in terms of sculptures gained. So you can always meld that in if you so choose. It's up to you, and it just depends on your preference. If you want to give some extra gems to maybe a longtime kingdom member who you want to reward for doing extra for the kingdom, and you don't have the sculptures to spare because they're not necessarily a rally or garrison main. But with that, we will wrap up our discussion on how to plan Mightiest Governor events. I may have missed a couple of topics, so if you have any other questions, absolutely let me know down in the comments, and I will do my best to answer them as quickly as possible. I also wanted to take a moment to stress that what works for one kingdom may not work for every kingdom, so ultimately you'll want to make the decision that benefits your kingdom. For example, you may have a kingdom need where a player is just getting into garrisons, and they need a boost with extra sculptures to catch back up on the meta. In that case, they may need multiple first places, and you might have one player who gets several hundred extra sculptures over another. And if that's what your kingdom needs, that's what they need. So while this is a great guide to keep things even once everybody's on the same playing field, ultimately you'll have to adjust to fit what your kingdom needs and to get them into that position. And once they're in that position, this is a great way to continue keeping commanders up to date for your garrisons and your rallies, and keeping your kingdom in a great fighting shape in terms of what their commander availability is. But let me know in the comments, is there another topic you want to see covered? Or if you have any other questions, like I said earlier. Or if you want to suggest other video topics, you can do that there, or join the Discord using the link in the description. And as always, good luck, fight well, and I will see you on the battlefield.